This is a visualization. See if you can see the story in your head. Even imagine that you are part of the tale itself as you listen. Find a comfy position and breathe deeply. Enjoy. Over the Pacific Ocean, clouds gathered. Tiny water droplets that had evaporated from the ocean rose up and began to gather. When enough droplets had come together, a cloud became visible. It is here that our story begins. Within that cloud was one drop of water. As the offshore winds blew, they hustled the clouds landward, taking the drop along for the ride. The clouds continued to grow until most of the sky over Juneau was coated in a quilt of grayish white. As the clouds headed inward, they traveled over a huge sheet of ice, and the droplets began to cool. As they cooled, the droplets came together. They merged, becoming heavier and heavier. Soon, so many droplets had gathered that they formed a raindrop and plummeted from the fluffy cloud, racing towards the earth. This happened again and again within the cloud. Some droplets rushed toward the forest, where they bounced off of a Sitka spruce bough and landed plop against the beak of a raven, who let out a clock of annoyance. Others fell back into the salt water of a channel that cut between a large island and the mainland. But our particular water droplet did something different. It pattered down on the surface of a vast sheet of ice that wove like a river for miles between the mountains. The water dripped into a crevasse where it froze and joined the millions of other droplets as they were compressed and squeezed, becoming more dense as the centuries rolled by. Even though it was frozen, it was ever moving, never stopping, as the glacier advanced. Eventually, it made its way to the front of the glacier, where, in the bright light of the day and with the density of the ice, it no longer appeared clear as the raindrop it had started out as, or white as the ice it had frozen into, but an unspeakably beautiful blue. One day, the sun shone brightly as the drop sat, held in the tall, cliff-like face of the glacier. Cracks had formed around the section of ice that contained the water droplet. Suddenly, a massive chunk of the front of the glacier gave way in a spectacular calving. The mammoth piece of ice sent a spray of water from the lake in front of the glacier high into the air. When all had stilled, the water droplet was no longer part of the huge glacier or even the iceberg that floated at the base of the glacier. It had been cast off the ice and was now part of the lake itself. The lake was different than anything that drop had known. It was a cloudy, greenish-brown color, thickly choked with silt from millions of rocks that the glacier had ground down and turned into the finest powder, and then rinsed with its own runoff to become part of the lake where the water droplet now moved. This lake was so very, very cold. After a long time floating aimlessly through the lake, the droplet suddenly was hustled with millions of other droplets into what became an ever clearer, fast-moving creek. Carried by the creek through water that was crystal clear, our drop rushed across the waterlogged ebony fur of a long-clawed hunter, waiting for a tasty salmon to flip onto the creek bank for her cubs' dinner. And the drop continued, over rocks and through still pools, moving, always moving, until something changed. It was drawn up by the roots of a hemlock tree that had tiny rootlets in the wall of the creek bed itself. The drop went up through the trunk of the tree to nourish it with all the minerals and nutrients that had joined the drop along the way. The tree flourished. And one day, when the conditions were just right, the tree exhaled all of the humidity that had accumulated within it. As the tree exhaled, all at once, a tiny cloud formed around it. That cloud slowly eased away from the tree, the water drop with it, and the droplet rose up and up in that tiny cloud to join other larger clouds in the bright blue sky.